Hello everybody. It's a great honour for me to be here, and it's lovely to be back in Maynooth among friends, old and new. The idea for this paper started with an off-the-cuff remark, as often happens, at the end of 2023, when I had given a very informal talk in the Senate room of Leinster House, once the townhouse of the Dukes of Leinster. After the talk, a politician came up to me and said, "I never thought of Leinster House as a family home." This comment stayed with me, and I went back over my extensive notes on the FitzGerald family and decided to concentrate on the family and how they lived their lives. I hope to lead you through over 150 years of the FitzGerald family history, from about 1740, when the FitzGerald family set up their family home in Carton, to the beginning of the 20th century, when after the early death of the fifth Duke and Duchess of Leinster, the FitzGerald family life, now being run by trustees, went into a spiral of uncertainty, of chaos, due in part to political, social, monetary and family reasons. When I thought of the title, I went back to my beautiful collection of books dealing with historic Irish houses, and noticed that very few of them mentioned the word home in the title. But of course they were homes. Yes, very different to the usual Irish home, but with many of the same problems and issues that affect every family. Even though I will be speaking of the family life of the first five Dukes and Duchesses of Leinster and their children, and briefly on the following generations, it cannot be done in equal time. Some lived longer lives, some held the position for longer periods. Some seemed to be very proactive, some more influential, but most importantly, some left us with wonderful records of their lives. This was probably not intentional, as most of my research has been into the private diaries, the family letters and other correspondence, the household books, contemporary newspapers, etc. I'm also aware that in many cases, these letters and newspapers and diaries have been edited or doctored by the family, or other interested parties probably. I came upon one file in the FitzGerald family home in the UK. It was empty except for a note in the handwriting of the third Duke, which I recognised, just saying, quote, "Documents destroyed, 1815. This may have been done for social or political reasons, economic reasons. This was the year that the FitzGeralds sold Leinster House, so maybe we can be kind and possibly say that they were decluttering in their downsizing. But I think it was probably more to do with family issues. Obviously the death of Lord Edward FitzGerald, the remarriage of Emily, the first Duchess of Leinster, and perhaps Augustus was being influenced by family and trustees. Again, he was only 14 when he took over as Duke. I am very, very grateful to the family, the FitzGerald family, and indeed Anne Hamilton of Hamwood, who have welcomed me into their homes and given me free access to all their private papers. This was my first meeting with the late Anne, 8th Duchess of Leinster, in her home in Oxfordshire. She's here with her beautiful granddaughter Hermione, and we spent 3 days in the cellar of her home, going through a multitude of uncatalogued papers, and she very kindly permitted me to copy many of them. Anne's words to me when I first met her was that when she and her husband Gerard, the 8th Duke, left Kilkea in 1960, quote, "Ireland was never mentioned again." I found this comment so sad, but thankfully things have changed, and the FitzGerald's family are now regular visitors to Maynooth, to Kilkea and to Dublin. I start with the 19th Earl, Robert, and his beautiful and very, very rich wife, Mary O'Brien of Thomond, daughter of the Earl of Inchiquin. One of her godmothers was Queen Mary, and I think this is important because we can trace the royal connection right up to the death of Desmond in World War I in France in 1916. Robert and his wife Mary married in 1709. When Robert was 34, Mary was only 16. They moved first into Kilkea and they had 12 children. Only 2 survived. I had always just said that in an off-the-cuff way, but when I read privately published by the Earls of Kildare and their ancestors, written and privately published in 1857, Charles gives a record of the names of these children and the year they were born. I haven't found the dates of their deaths, just the awful footnote, quote, died young. Of the 12 children born to Robert and Mary, only 2 were alive when the family moved to Carton in 1741. Their 5th child, James, and their 11th child, Margaret. Originally I had unfortunately the children who died were in red, but unfortunately it has turned around. So you can see out of their 12 children, only 2 survived. We can also see by this that many women were constantly pregnant. I will discuss later some of the births of later children where we do have the records of their births and deaths, and will say that despite their great wealth and very favourable lifestyle, these women and men were dealing with the nearly annual joy and worry of the births of their children, but also the regular trauma of their children's early deaths. Robert gave his wife this beautiful toilet service to celebrate the birth of his 3rd and only surviving son, James. I'm showing you the toilet set. It consists of 28 pieces of silver gilt, beautifully decorated with the coat of arms of the FitzGeralds and the O'Brien family. And toilet services were very, very important to women of the early 18th century, where the quest for beauty was so important. Many records proclaim the titled women to be women of great beauty. So appearance was taken very, very seriously. Many might have also been scarred by past sicknesses and disease, so I'm sure that Lady Mary's set would have been full of potions, lotions, many herbal ointments to disguise any flaws that she might have had in her appearance. This Kildare toilet set is unusual in its size, and as travel became more commonplace in the later 18th century, the toilet sets became smaller and more portable. This toilet set actually was sold by the Leinster estate in 1926, sold again at a later auction, and now it's in the Ulster Museum in Belfast. So having bought the lease of Carton, they set about the complete refurbishment of the house. Records show that they remained in Kilkea while the initial work was going on, and eventually moved to Carton in 1741. As we know, nothing was spared in the refurbishment of the house. The great architects were employed, and also in the heraldry, the sign outside, again we see the link of the O'Brien and the FitzGerald family combined in that. The private papers tell us that only Robert, his wife Mary, and their daughter Lady Margaret moved to Carton, as their son James was still on his grand tour. There's no mention of any of the other children, so we have to presume that they had died before they moved to Carton in 1741. Of course, many servants would have moved with the FitzGeralds, and then the visitors and their servants were all welcomed in abundance. Unfortunately, Robert died in 1744 and was buried privately in Christchurch, where this very fine monument was erected. This memorial shows Robert, his widow, his son, the first Duke of Leinster, and his daughter, later Countess of Hillsborough, with the very kind inscription which says, "Though possessed of a great estate, he managed it with particular prudence in order to give freer course to his many and great charities. He left money to charter schools in Castledermot and in Maynooth, and left £50 each to the poor of Maynooth, Kildare, Athy and Castledermot. In his will, he left Countess Mary £1,200, his Dublin house, which at that stage was in Suffolk Street, with all the furnishings, the plate, the jewels, with the instructions that they were to be handed on to his son James, that he might finish Carton at that stage. And to his daughter Margaret, he left £20,000. Also, I just want to say about this memorial, why I'm showing it again, it just shows the two children. So I think it brings us again that 10 of these children had died at this stage. And Mary is also buried in Christchurch after this. Then we come to James, married Emily Lennox. She had been reared near Chichester on the Goodwood estate, the Duke of Richmond, but she had been a regular attendance at all the balls in London from the age of 10 years of age. They had their wedding reception in the Duke of Richmond's townhouse, which was in Whitehall Place in Westminster. Lady Emily was only 15 and 4 months. And all the contemporary reports say that this was the wedding, the most magnificent, the most talked of, the most extravagant event of 1747. When they moved to Ireland first, they stayed for 3 or 4 months in Leinster Lodge near Athy. And in her letters, she says that she's happy, not because she's her own mistress, but that her happiness is based on being married to the best and kindest of husbands. She seems to have loved her time in Leinster Lodge. She describes it as a small, odd little house, nothing more than a good farmhouse. But she says, quote, "We read, we write, we walk, we work." She says that even though it might rain heavily, within half an hour, it's gone. Emily said that she's sorry to leave Leinster Lodge, but that Lady Kildare, who she says doesn't like the countryside, has completely finished Carton. Nothing is wanting there at all. She says that James is looking forward to the move to Carton, but he has no wish to live there without a family. So Lady Kildare and James's sister Margaret, who's 17 or 18 at that stage, they also live in Carton. And Emily is very fond of both of them. She says her mother-in-law is reserved and that Emily was a little afraid of her at the start, whereas Lady Margaret is charming and with a very open heart. Emily again never mentions any of the other siblings, which leads us to believe that they had gone at this stage. Some of her letters, I'm sure many of you have read the letters of Emily. Some are just so funny and revealing. Some in England had felt very sorry for Emily, the fact that she had married James and had to move to Ireland. In one, in 1747, she says sarcastically, I would suggest, that she deserves great compassion for, quote, being with a person whom I love best, who studies how to please me and make me happy more and more every day, to a very pretty country where I meet nothing but civilities from everyone, to a family who are very fond of me, to a country where I have a charming house being built, this is Kildare House, a sweet place in the country, Carton. Certainly, I think I deserve great compassion for all of this, unquote. So, November 1947, the Kildares had rented a house on Stephen's Green for the winter. Emily is pregnant with her first child, and she can't wait for her charming house, Kildare House, to be finished. I was very fortunate to find this FitzGerald Bible in Oxfordshire. It's a handwritten account of all the births, where the children were born, their sponsors, their marriages when they know, and the deaths, and it's from 1747. The recording of Emily's, of the first and second Dukes of Leinster, seemed to have been done in one hand, so after 1805, but the information was probably recorded elsewhere, but it is in the hand of the third Duke. This is a record of the children of James and Emily from this diary. 1747, Lord George is born in Dublin. His sponsors were King George II, and even though she had moved to Ireland, the link with the royal family was maintained still. Another sponsor was the Duke of Richmond and Mary Countess of Kildare. And in all the children, there were at least 3 sponsors, sometimes 4, but at least 3 sponsors. 1 year later, we see that William is born in London. Now, you think of that journey, Dublin to London, whether pregnant or not at that time. The route was to Parkgate, a little seaport just about 12 miles from Chester, or to Holyhead. The FitzGeralds sometimes used the Packet, which was the mail boat. Nothing luxurious there. The 36-hour crossing, sometimes people had to sleep on the floor, and Emily writes about having to spend the journey in the FitzGerald coach, actually on the boat. Luckily, on many of the occasions, the FitzGeralds had use of the yacht, which had belonged to the Viceregal Lodge in Dublin. Then they had 4 or 5 days horse-drawn coach to London, stopping off at inns along the way. Sometimes they brought their own coach, and she often talks about horses falling ill or getting lame. So 1 year later then we see that Caroline, I'm not going to go through all of Emily's children, don't worry, but 1 year later you see Lady Caroline is born in Carton. So Emily's sister Caroline was staying in Carton at that time with her husband Henry Fox and their children and servants. They were staying for about 2 months in Carton. And this is why I think Emily might have chosen the name Caroline. And she was Caroline Mabel. And Mr. Fox, I think we're told, was reading the old Kildare manuscripts at the time in Carton, and he said that the name Mabel was a very common FitzGerald name. So this is why it was added. Emily, writing again to her old nanny that she keeps in constant contact with, she says that baby Caroline is small, plump, she's in perfect health. She says that George, who's now 2, is always kissing and hugging her. And she has written it, she said she had written it, if she had written a description of a perfect child, he would be it. Oh, just a mother loves their sons, don't they? And even though William is only 1, he's walking and talking at that stage. And he loves his nurse, and Emily is a little jealous of the fact that he loves his nurse. Now, on the same day, in 1750, Emily's mother, Sarah, also gave birth to a baby in Chichester. She was 45. Sadly, Emily's father, Charles, Duke of Richmond, died later that year in 1750, and her mother, Sarah, died 1 year later in 1751. Immediately, Emily's 2 sisters, Louisa and Sarah, were sent to Carton. They were only 8 and 7 at the time. And a year later, the baby who was born in 1750, Cecilia, she was sent over at a year to be reared by Emily as well. And the instructions were that they were to stay in Ireland until they were 15. She had another 2 daughters in 1753, 1754. Now, can you imagine the house with all these children? Yes, there were nurses and carers and unending staff, but I just have this vision of children flying up and down the landings of Carton, the corridors of Carton. And confinement for women who had given birth was usually 6 weeks. The health of their children was a constant worry to Emily and all mothers of the 18th century. Her letters to her sisters describe the children's ailments and also her remedies to try and keep them healthy and strong. She's reading Rousseau and taking advice on the from many of the contemporary health manuals at the time. Some of the so-called cures seem extreme to us, such as leeches to bleed the children. Mercury was used to cure worms, and creosote actually at one stage was used to inhale the creosote. She and her sisters were very much into the new fashion of fresh air and sea bathing, and she travels regularly to Malvern on the borders of Herefordshire and Worcestershire to take the waters. She also brings her children to a spa resort near Bristol. Emily is constantly being troubled with eye ailments and tries various potions to get relief from this. And even though her sight is bad, she insists that her children read to her constantly when she has to retire to a darkened room. When Carton actually was being restored maybe just over 20 years ago, I remember being up on the 3rd floor. And if you look at Carton, and it's the very top room on the right-hand side on the 3rd floor, they were removing some more modern panelling, and in behind they found this 18th century wallpaper. And it was wallpaper with this snake figure. Now, the snake figure is the Greek god of medicine and would often be used. It also happens that this, I think, is the sunniest room in Carton. So perhaps this functioned as a sick bay or as maybe a lying-in room or a maternity room, I don't know, but it just seems strange that they would put a wallpaper like that in that room. Despite all the efforts of James and Emily, many of their children died. Their letters show that they both grieved intensely on the death of a child. One of her letters in 1754 tells of her heartbreak at the death of Caroline. She calls it, quote, "my poor, dead, sweet, pretty little baby." She had another baby in 1755 in Holland House in London and called her Caroline in memory of the child who had died. This was very, very common in the 18th and 19th century that you would call a child after a child who had died. Sadly, the second little Caroline died after 4 weeks. Also, parents were advised by family and medics to somehow limit their attachment with the infant and very young children. But Emily is astounded that she could feel the loss of a child, of such a young child. She writes, quote, "I was much more grieved than I thought possible." Many also believed at the time that 12 years of age was a turning point in a child's survival. It was accepted that half of all children died before the age of 12 in every society. So Emily and James are devastated at the death of their eldest son, George, in London at the age of 17. In one of her letters to James, she writes, quote, "he was past the age where children die." I think that's just such a sad thing. And in this famous cellar, where I spent so many days with Hermione and the Dowager, I came upon this beautiful box in a corner with a little plaque just saying Duchess of Leinster. And Anne, the Duchess at the time, she didn't recognise it, she didn't know what it was. So when we opened it, we found 4 trays of miniatures of the FitzGerald family, most by Hugh Douglas Hamilton. The first 3 trays had members, the famous Leinster family that we know, the older ones. But the bottom tray contained miniatures of the children of the FitzGerald family who had died young. And some had labels, handwritten labels to identify them. Some had inscriptions on the back. I felt it was a very moving moment. It was like we were looking at the memoriam cards, really, of the 18th century. Also at the bottom was this ring belonged to, with a note attached, again written by the 3rd Duke. I recognised his writing, saying that it was given to Lady Louisa by Lord Edward FitzGerald when she visited him just before his death in 1798. Most of these miniatures now in the FitzGerald collection have been sold, and I believe some are in the collection at Castletown, which is good. So the schooling of the children was different for the sons and the daughters. George and William, the eldest 2 boys, they went to school with their cousins, Steve and Charles Fox, in Wandsworth in England, and then they went on to Eton after that. They were accompanied by a minder, Mr. Bowl. And apart from regular subjects, Emily says that they also learned to be good gamblers, to be good drinkers, and good card players. After Eton, then, it was like a rite of passage that the boys would go on the tour of Europe for about 2 years, as their father had done. And they saw the sights, they went to the opera, the concert, the balls, they bought their paintings and the artifacts. It was like a souvenir of their trips going around Europe. The girls were educated in Carton with tutors who taught them French and Latin. The FitzGeralds had an ongoing order with the bookshops in Dublin and in Paris and in Dublin, so that the Carton Library was constantly stocked with newly published books. They also learned deportment, the girls, and how to socialise. They learned how to sew, how to do tapestry. More importantly, they had music and dance classes every day. This was to prepare them really for the coming out balls in Dublin and London. Painting and sculpture was also taught. An important and fun subject was acting, and the children were encouraged to produce and act and to play in various plays for visitors. Emily's father actually had been involved in the promotion in London of Italian opera, so maybe this is where she got it. The children were also taken very, very regularly to shows in Dublin. They were taken to the theatre in Crow Street in Dublin and to the music halls. Emily tells once she's in Crow Street. She's in a premiere box, of course, with her children, including Charles, who's only 6, and she talks about the people down in the pit admiring her lovely family. The death of her son George at the age of 17 changed Emily's idea of schooling for the boys. After George's death, she doesn't seem to have sent her boys to England, but sent most of the children to Frascati in the Black Rock to be taught by their Scottish tutor, Mr. William Ogilvie. There they had great times. They talk about swimming in the sea every day. They're running, they're playing in the grounds, they're playing games. And the FitzGerald family and the wives and mothers seemed to oversee the social life of the house. I suppose they would try to complement their husbands in their political career, really. But they both had a huge input into the running of the home. Both were involved in the organisation of the servants. This household book, again, came from Oxfordshire. It gives all the instructions for the indoor servants of the house. And any disputes, I think it's interesting, any disputes between the servants are to be brought to the attention of James or Emily. Emily was also involved in the outdoor planning of the estate, and she educates herself about the planning, about planting, which shrubs would be more attractive at various times. She keeps in contact with a noted botanist, Peter Collison, constantly, and she continues with the planting of mixed native and foreign trees. She had visited Painshill in Surrey and was impressed by the design of Mr. Charles Hamilton there, and there are similarities in the works of Carton and there. Arnold Horner states that Waterstone Cottage, having been returned to the family in the 1760, was developed as a fashionable poetic garden trend. And the plan, unfortunately, they originally had a plan that the river would be visible from the house. Unfortunately, that became unattainable. This is Waterstone Cottage, also known as the Shell Cottage. This is the one in Goodwood. And I've seen this cottage in Goodwood. Emily had seen this erected by her parents on the Goodwood estate. And perhaps Emily started putting up some shells in the Waterstone Cottage. But the intricate design really suggests that this was done by expert craftspeople at the time, at a later stage. That's the Goodwood Cottage, and that's Carton. They're completely different. The Shell Cottage in Carton is very different to the one in Goodwood. Rosemary Baird, the ex-curator of Goodwood, showed me the designs for the Goodwood Shell Cottage in the Duke of Richmond's papers in Chichester, and also they have all the accounts for the purchase of the shells. I haven't found any of that for Carton at that stage. Especially after James and Emily were created Duke and Duchess of Leinster, and Kildare House obviously had the name changed to Leinster House, great balls were held in Carton and Leinster House. Music pieces such as the Marchioness of Kildare Minuet and the Marquess of Kildare March were both composed in honour of the FitzGeralds. At one ball in Leinster House, over 300 people attended, included many of those named in the Carton Bible that I was at the sponsors. It's like reading an 18th century who's who. Now, King George wasn't there, but the Viscount Hillsborough, Duke of Dorset, Viscount Molesworth, Duke of Devonshire, Lord Powerscourt, Countess of Drogheda. They were all there in Leinster House. The girls in the family were being groomed for marriage, not only by Emily, but also by her sister, Louisa. And they talked about having to move all the furniture that night in Leinster House to accommodate the dancing. Also, sometimes when there were just ladies there, they all seemed to be very good card players and took card playing very, very seriously and betted on it as well. So I think most of you know, when James died in 1773 in Leinster House, Emily married the children's tutor, William Ogilvy, within a year. And there was just consternation at this. Her son, her mother-in-law, her family, society in Dublin, London, and even in Paris, everybody was aghast. And Mrs. Delaney, the great writer of the 18th century, says, I think quite casually, quote, "People wonder at her marriage, as she is reckoned one of the most expensive women in the world. But perhaps she thought it incumbent to marry him and make an honest man out of him." And then she finishes with, "I pity the children." But only her sister Louisa actually is quoted as saying, quote, "It is the best match she could make, as nobody could love her children better." Needless to say, Emily's 2, maybe 3 children that she had with William Ogilvy are not recorded in the Leinster Bible for some reason. But when James Duke died in Leinster House in 1773, only the first floor grand portrait gallery had to be completed. William had returned from his grand tour with some of his male cousins again. The estate was now in debt through overspending by James and Emily, and also because of the many siblings that had to be financially looked after. After Robert's death, and Emily was now living in France at this stage, William set about completing the picture gallery. Luckily, he married Amelia Olivia St. George, an only child and heiress, and she had inherited the most wonderful picture collection. Amelia proved a much-needed injection of funds at that stage. They continued the refurbishment of Leinster House with the picture gallery, a description of the picture gallery. This is now where the Senate actually sits. And one of the descriptions is, quote, "Over the supper room is the picture gallery, containing many fine paintings by the first masters, with many ornaments chosen and displayed with great elegance. The most distinguished pictures are a student drawing from a bust by Rembrandt, The Rape of Europa by Claude Lorraine, pictures of Rubens and his 2 wives by Van Dyck, a landscape by Barrett." So here we will see wonderful, wonderful paintings, and they were all removed to Carton in 1815. Again, Amelia and William seem to have had a very, very loving relationship and had 13 children. After 4 daughters, a son, George, was born in 1783. His sponsor was King George III. Unfortunately, this little boy died soon after birth, died an infant. Another 4 daughters followed, and then, of course, there was great celebration when Augustus Frederick was born. His sponsor then was the Prince of Wales. So again, we can see the royal connection with them. They had 13 children. Only 8 survived adulthood. We don't have information on their education of their children, but as most of the children were girls, we presume that they were tutored at home in Carton. One of William's brothers says that life is now dull at Carton and the Duke and Duchess are leading a quiet life. A good friend, Deirdre Conroy, lent me this a copy of a memorandum book produced by Watsons of Dame Street for the Duchess of Leinster in 1779. It's now in a private collection. And I honestly don't think that Amelia is leading a quiet life, because this is her diary for 1 week. Sunday, she's meeting the Duke of Grafton. Monday, Mrs. Delaney. Tuesday, Lady Holderness. Wednesday, Lord Jersey. Thursday, she's meeting the Duke of Grafton first, and then she's going to Miss Potts' concert. She has Friday off, and then she's meeting Mr. Riddell. So I don't think that's a very... And the whole year of that 1779, it's like that the whole year going through it. They continued the decoration of Leinster House. There were reports of masquerade balls, music playing till dawn. She died, Amelia died at the age of 46, a very, very difficult time. She died in 1798. Difficult time for the FitzGerald family. Obviously, Lord Edward FitzGerald died the same year, and the Act of Union in Ireland, so Dublin was changed now forever. William actually moved to England and died in England. So Augustus Frederick was only 13 or 14 when he inherited Carton, and they say that Carton was, quote, put to sleep for a couple of years. It said that Carton had become shabby because the Parliament had gone. Augustus and others had decided that there was no need for such a fine house, and Leinster House was sold. The FitzGeralds received obviously badly needed funds, and he married Charlotte Augusta, the daughter of the Earl of Stanhope. She was only 15 when they married. He was 27. Again, she brought a good dowry with her. And they brought back to Carton to life. They used the funds, you would think, to pay down their debt. Not at all. They refurbished Carton with Richard Morrison designing the dining room, obviously, the lovely dining room, the new library, the new entrance hall, and all the furniture and paintings and even some fireplaces. Actually, one of those fireplaces there was removed from Leinster House and brought to Carton. Another fireplace in that page, this William Lawrence picture here, was brought from Kilkea and put into this room. Great balls again were held, and music evenings were held. And Augustus himself was a great musician. He learned the double bass, and according to some, he played to an orchestra standard. Charlotte herself was a great musician. And then, of course, this wonderful organ was designed in 1857. And another piece of music that I found, the Carton Gallop, was composed around that time. And here we see that's the drawing by Lord Gerald FitzGerald, and then the organ in situ. Augustus and Charlotte, they had 6 children and 4 survived. No royal sponsor was used at that time, but Queen Victoria visited in 1849 with Prince Albert, and included, this was the flag actually that flew above Carton at that time. Again, it was in Oxfordshire when I visited there. I think it still has now been sold. And we're told that Victoria, she visited the Shell Cottage. The reports say that she walked the gardens for 20 minutes and 2 bands played God Save the Queen and the Coburg March. And in the Shell Cottage, actually, there are 2 small little panels depicting beautiful love scenes. Both panels are signed C.A. Leinster, 1834. And another 2 are signed Caroline Stanhope. She was a sister of Charlotte who was staying in Carton. And after Charlotte's death in 1859, the Journal of Horticulture stated that Waterstone Cottage had been altered by the Duchess Charlotte, who planned all and had every arch and panel fitted before the shells were put up into place. So I think that we might sort of, I know that Stella Tilliard said that we have a vision of Emily and her 3 sisters, but the shells in these cottages are they're just magnificent. Carton was left without a duchess, but Augustus continued his visits to the clubs in Dublin, which were still very, very popular. Suzanne Pegley quotes that they represented the social networking of power in Dublin at the time. He was president of the Irish Academy of Music, and he persuaded Queen Victoria to attach the royal title to so now we have the Royal Irish Academy. He was Grand Master of the Freemasons, had his own seat there, as he also has still there in St. Patrick's Cathedral. He regularly attended meetings. He was a duke for 70 years, and he seemed to have great input into local works, drainage works, road works. He also had to pay over £70,000 as family payments, which of course left the estate again in a very perilous position. He died in Carton in 1874, and he and his wife and some of their children lie in repose in the tower just outside the gate here on the first floor in St Mary's Church. The fourth Duke and Lady Caroline Grenville, she was the daughter of the Duke of Sutherland. They had married in 1847. The reports of the wedding, they must have been good fun, I think. Shows them running in sacks, rolling barrels, etc. So they seem to have been good fun. He succeeded to the title when they were both in their 50s. They had lived at Kilkea with their Kilkea Castle here, with their 15 children. Their children had been born in Kilkea in London, Dublin, Carton, Stafford House in London, Maritimo in Blackrock. So again, we see that, they're constantly on the move. And I had thought actually that I had found the first twins in the FitzGerald family in 1855. But on this visit to Oxfordshire, I found the most beautiful necklace with 15 little lockets to represent each of the children. I discovered that Eva, firstborn 1855, she was born in London in January, and Mabel was born in Maritimo in Blackrock in December 1855. This was also confirmed actually in the FitzGerald Bible, and also in an inventory in 1908 of the jewellery of the FitzGeralds. It talks about this beautiful necklace. Their firstborn daughter, 1850, was called Mabel. So pregnancy, you see, was doing nothing, wasn't stopping their travel. They were travelling all the time, whether pregnant or not. In Kilkea, the children were educated every day. Classes started at 7:30, then scripture, then breakfast, then music. And we have little information about this family's time in Carton. I would suggest that most of them had probably left. I sometimes think of these two, they're like the Charles and Camilla of their day, that they'd waited so long in the wings really before becoming Duke. Caroline's one legacy is that she established the little graveyard in Carton for the first little girl, Mabel, who was born in 1850. 17 years later, two daughters died within 20 days of each other's. Lady Margaret died on 26th of October 1867. She was only 15 days old, and her sister Geraldine died on the 15th of November. She was 18 years of age. So then you can see that Robert, he was born and died. So, they had to deal with this all the time, whether they had money or not. The death rate was terrible. We know that King Edward and Queen Alexandra, the Prince and Princess of Wales, dined in Carton, as I say, during their visit. And I just wanted to show you this. This is the William Lawrence. We're talking at a time now when 1870, Carton is in debt, and you would think that they might have been, pulling in the reins a bit. And then I found this image in a family photographs, 1891, taken by the family. So you can see the stucco work below when we look at the one in the Lawrence, there's no stucco work below the pelmet at all. And the paintings are quite high up on the wall here. So somebody obviously paid a lot of money to have the stucco work then placed below that, and they then had to move all the paintings down. And I found this lovely family plan. It was in a private collection when I saw it. And this was, we know, one of the family drawing about how they were going to change the paintings to suit the new decoration. Now we come to the last Duke and Duchess who lived in Carton. Lord Gerald FitzGerald married Lady Hermione, the daughter of the Earl of Feversham, the biggest society wedding of the year. She was accompanied by 11 bridesmaids. Queen Victoria's daughter, Louisa, was a very good friend. She was among the guests. They came to live in Kilkea, and very soon the cracks started to appear. Whereas Emily and the earlier duchesses had power nearly equal to their husbands, Hermione was not permitted to make any real decisions. From my research into her personal letters, some in the Somerset archives and some in the family papers, she seems to have had a very, very melancholy view of life from a very early age. A few months before her wedding, she wrote a very tragic, unpublished poem called September 1883, where she's really questioning her own worth. She had a baby daughter soon after the marriage, but that daughter is not mentioned in the family Bible at all. There's no mention of the baby, except in her letters to her good friend Evelyn de Vesey of Abbeyleix. She writes to Evelyn about a fly hitting off the four walls of her bedroom and calling out to her, quote, "Your baby is dead, your baby is dead." The omission of this baby's record from the family might suggest that this baby was to be forgotten and not spoken about, and perhaps this led to Hermione's further distress. She seems to rely on three very good friends, Evelyn de Vesey, Lady Elizabeth of Fingal, and Lady Emily Lawless of the Lyons estate. Evelyn de Vesey said that Gerald is a good man, but not for Hermione. So the first record recorded is Morris in Kilkea in 1887. Then following the move to Carton in late 1887, that's 1888. They moved to Carton in 1887. Desmond was born in 88 in Carton. Gerald didn't seem to allow Hermione, as I say, to do anything, and sometime after this, Gerald and Hermione separated. Letters between Gerald and Hermione's mother and Hermione's sisters all tried to reconcile the couple. Hermione had fallen in love with Evelyn de Vesey's brother, Lord Elcho. Terry Dooley calls him a cad. And she had a son in London in 1892. She had been a member of the Souls group, a late Victorian aristocratic clique, really, and they enjoyed visiting each other's estates, very high-spirited. One letter mentions a 6 a.m. bell, and this bell was for everybody to get back to their appropriate beds. Some letters, one something, and this is sort of very close to the bone with the royal family at the moment, but they do mention having two boys, that after you had two boys, well then you could do what you wanted. Maybe I'm being cruel. When Hermione was persuaded to return to Carton, life went on, and Edward was brought up as a FitzGerald, and Gerald continues to sit in his library. He catalogued all his books. She's constantly trying to get and maintain governess to deal with her three boys. And also she's trying to deal with the sicknesses of the children. After Gerald's death in 1893, Hermione speaks of, quote, all the kind words left unspoken. And that his last words to her as she sat at his sick bed in Carton, and she was moving from one chair to another, when he said, quote, please don't go. She says his love was deep and encircling like the sea. She seems to have been very sad and depressed, and another sad poem, Duncombe Park, 1893, written when she went there after Gerald's death. But the one place she found some sort of solace was in Alexandra College, where she was a patron. She learned Latin to try and help the girls. She was very interested in the education of women, and she regularly attended class there herself. She gave very generously to pupils of the school on the condition that it would remain anonymous. She attended every Student' Day presentation, and her relationship with the students was so strong, she was simply referred to as our Duchess. Within a year, she was diagnosed with TB, and she went with her sisters and her mother first of all to Monte Carlo, and then went to Menton in France, where she died. Her body was brought back to Carton, and it was one of Maynooth's blackest days. Very soon after her death, in 1896, the first Hermione art lecture was arranged and planned by Evelyn de Vesey in Alexandra College. The lecture was made possible by a gift from an anonymous donor. The Hermione lectures continue every year in Alexandra College to this day. And in 2012, the present Duchess of Leinster, Fiona, was invited, and she presented the annual award there in 2012. Hermione's three boys were in Kilkea and were then placed in the care of aunts and trustees. Morris eventually went to Craig House, the eldest, with 2 doctors to mind him. He went in 1910 and was over and back a few times since then. His letters are also recorded in the Somerset writing to Evelyn de Vesey. He died, unfortunately, in 1922. Desmond went to war and he died in 1916. His greatest friend was Edward, Prince of Wales. And I just want to read just one letter that I found from Desmond. This is written in 1914. And it's to his aunts. He says, "This is just to say that except for the sorrow it might cause to my dear relations, I have no reason to fear death, and I hope this will comfort to anyone who sorrows over it. I'm most anxious that on no account should there be a memorial service for me, and as far as possible that nobody should mourn. I should, however, like a small tablet put up to me in the Guards' Chapel and at Eton, where I spent the happiest days of my life. To a great extent, I'm a futurist, but if I am granted to die for my country, it is the one death above all others that I wish for and gladly accept. As far as I know, I leave no unpaid bills." So this was a letter that he just gave as he went off to war. Unfortunately, he died, and I have copies. I'm not going to read them both. I'll just read part of one. One is from the letters, as I say, we found them over in the UK, from Buckingham Palace. This is from Edward, Prince of Wales. He said, "I must ask," this is to Desmond's aunt, "I must ask you to accept my sincere sympathy. I got a wire this evening to say that Desmond had been accidentally killed at Calais. It is one of the greatest blows or shocks I have ever had, for in Desmond's death I have lost my greatest friend." Again, the letter from Queen Mary, the same thing. She says that Desmond had joined her for tea just 2 weeks prior to that. So the connection with the royal family was still there. So here we have Edward, the 7th Duke of Leinster. He's blamed for everything, and I really don't think he deserves to be blamed for everything. He went on to socialise, married May Etheridge plus 3 others, and the 8th Duke of Leinster, his wife told me that at 4 years of age, he was taken into a solicitor's office in London with his mother. May Etheridge brought him in, and she walked out a door and he never saw her again. And he was sent to Johnstown Castle. FitzGerald's there. I don't know why he wasn't sent to Carton. I don't know why he wasn't sent to Kilkea. He was sent to Johnstown Castle, which was a FitzGerald house. And I just found this letter. And it's just a sad letter. It just says, "Dear Mummy, I hope you are well, and I wish you a very happy Xmas and a happy New Year. I'm sending you a card which, W-I-T-C-H, I painted with the lovely paint box you sent me, and I have the lovely Meccano you gave me. And thank you very much for the lovely photo you sent me. I hope you're having a nice time. The hounds were down here today. How is Daddy? I hope you're having nice weather. I hope you will like the card. Give my best love to Daddy from your dear son, Gerald. Love and kisses." So here we can see just a little boy who's been left, without parents. This is a very historic photograph. In the centre, we have the 7th Duke, Edward, then Gerald with Tom, who the son of Maurice, the present Duke Maurice here. Unfortunately, Tom died in a car accident in 1997. But Gerald, after Gerald, he married Joanna first, and they had 3 children. Again, first child Pamela died after about 6 months. She is mentioned in the family Bible. And Rosemary, who's been a great help to me, she lives in North Wales, near Bristol, and Nesta, who lives in Boris. And 2 sons, Maurice, the present Duke of Leinster, and John. Maurice's wife told me that, again, when he left Ireland in 1960, he was 12. He never ever came back. Unfortunately, his son died in 1997, and the following year, she bought him as a Christmas present a trip to Ireland. And then the final, the full circle, his lovely daughter Francesca got married in Carton in 2017. So it had gone full circle. And these are the late Lord John FitzGeralds. Hermione, this lovely girl here, she was really responsible for the reconnection of the FitzGerald family to Kildare and to Carton. And Edward, her son, he studied in Trinity. He lived with me for 6 months, so he was a nice thing. This, then, the final two is here. I brought them to Leinster House, and I mean, what a historic photograph. He's Lord Edward FitzGerald and his ancestor, Lord Edward FitzGerald. And then this one, I say, reclaiming Leinster House. They told Sean O'Farrell, who very kindly invited us for lunch, that when this house was sold in 1815 to the RDS, that there was a clause that there would always be a room for the FitzGeralds in Leinster House. So Sean O'Farrell left in a panic and didn't turn back. But can I just finish to say that the FitzGerald family today have embraced their history in Ireland and take pride in their past. The sadness of their leaving in 1960 has been replaced by their joy at their reconnection. They are regular visitors, and the present Duchess said to me just last week that every time Maurice, the 9th Duke, comes to Ireland, he feels like he's coming home. Thank you. Thank you.